3 days after we put on the rings, Shanting One posted on her moments. There was no caption, just a photo of her left hand resting on a cup of coffee, the silver band on her ring finger catching the sunlight. In the corner of the picture, you could see my finger wearing the same ring, holding the coffee cup as handle. In less than 10 minutes, her comments exploded. Her colleagues, friends, and college classmates poured in question marks, exclamation points, and roses flooding the screen. The top comment was from her mother. Didn't even say anything. Right below it, her father's comment, "Nice ring." She was curled up on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, laughing so hard her shoulders shook. I came out of the kitchen carrying a plate of fruit, set it on the coffee table, and leaned over to take a look. "Your mom seems a little upset." "No, that's just how she talks." She held the phone up to me. "Dad says the ring is nice. He has good taste." Of course. I take after him. I popped a piece of apple into her mouth and she chewed twice, then suddenly frowned. "What's wrong? Have you lost weight recently?" She reached out and pinched my cheek. "There is no flesh left on your face." "Actually, yes there is, we're too busy." She put down her phone, and her expression grew serious. "You've been working late a lot lately, coming home pretty late." I said it was nothing, just a project on a tight deadline. She looked at me for a few seconds, didn't press further. But that night she made a whole table full of food: braised pork ribs, sweetened tart fish, garlic lettuce, and a pot of chicken soup. I ate until I was stuffed, leaning back in my chair unable to move. She sat across from me, watching me with an unreadable look in her eyes. I only found out later that she had been observing me during that time too. Not because she didn't trust me, because she cared too much. When someone truly cares about you, they can even tell when your breathing changes. For the 2 weeks that followed, I really was busy with a project. The company had taken on a new client, and I was the point person: meetings every day, revising proposals, arguing with the client. Sometimes by the time I got home, she was already asleep. The bedside lamp would still be on, her book half written face down on the pillow. I'd wash up quietly, then when I slipped under the covers, she'd groggily turn over, throw an arm over me, mumble something unintelligible, and fall back asleep. One night I didn't get home until 2 in the morning. The living room light was still on. She was curled up on the sofa, asleep. The TV on with the volume muted, its silent images flickering. On the coffee table sat an insulated lunchbox. I opened it. Food, still warm. I crouched down to look at her sleeping. Her eyelashes were long, casting a small fan-shaped shadow. Her breathing was soft, her lips slightly parted like a child's. I suddenly felt like such a jerk for making her wait so long. "Shanting One," I said softly. She stirred but didn't wake. "Ting One." Her pupils slowly focused, and when she recognized me, the corner of her mouth curled up. "You way back? Why didn't you go to bed?" "Waiting for you." She sat up and dropped her eyes. "Did you eat?" "Not yet." I yelled, "I'll heat it up." She picked up the lunchbox and headed to the kitchen. I followed behind her. She turned on the stove, reheated the oil, and tossed the food into the wok. Her movements as smooth as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. I leaned against the fridge and watched her. The hum of the range filled the air. She glanced back at me. "What are you standing there for? Go wash your hands." I went and washed my hands. By the time I came back, the food was already plated. She sat across from me, hopping her chin on her hands, and watched me eat. Good. How did it go with the client today?" "Fine. They approved of the proposal." She let out a sigh of relief, her whole body relaxing, her shoulders sinking. "That's good." After I finished eating, she went to do the dishes. I hugged her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder, watching her washing. Her hands were submerged in the soapy water, the silver ring catching the light from the faucet for a brief flash. "Don't you wait for me anymore," I said. "You go to sleep first." "I can't fall asleep if I don't wait." "Then what if I put you to bed and then leave?" She turned off the water and turned around to face me, her hands still dripping. "When you unshoot, are you an idiot?" "What? If you put me to sleep and then go back to work, what is the difference from not coming home at all?" I thought about it. She slapped my face lightly with her wet hand, cool with the lingering scent of dish soap. "I yelled, I'll try to come home earlier from now on," I said. "You said it." "I said it." She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the dishes. I kept my arms around her, and in that moment, the exhaustion of the whole day seemed to melt away. The day the project launched, I took a half day off and went home early. She had gone to the supermarket to buy groceries and was empty back yet. I changed my clothes, tidied up the apartment, then went to the kitchen to see what was in the fridge. pork ribs, corn, carrots, a box of tofu. I decided to make some rib soup and stir-fry a couple of dishes. By the time Shen Tingwan came back, the soup was already simmering on the stove. She pushed the door open, smelled the aroma, and froze for a second. You made this, Sue? She put her shopping bags down, swapped her shoes for slippers, and walked over. Yeah, didn't you say the lunch was today? It is done. I got back early. She walked into the kitchen, lifted the lid to check the soup, and looked at the chopped ingredients on the cutting board. Then she turned around, stood on her tiptoes and pecked me on the cheek. Thanks for your hard work, she said. It is no trouble. Then go buy another bottle of vinegar. We way out. I changed my shoes, went downstairs, bought a bottle of vinegar at the convenience store by the gate, and grabbed 2 boxes of strawberries that she loved. When I got back, she was already stir-frying, an apron tied around her waist, sleeves rolled up to her elbows revealing her slender pale forearms. I set the vinegar on the counter, washed the strawberries, put them in a bowl, and held one up to her mouth. I wiped it off with my thumb. Her ears turned red again. You always do this, she murmured. Do what? Just suddenly doing things like this. What things? She glared at me. Didn't she answer, and turned back to her cooking. When I saw her smiling, the corners of her mouth were curved up, impossible to suppress. During dinner, she suddenly asked Lin Yuanshu, have you ever thought about what kind of house you want to live in? I was caught off guard, my chopsticks freezing midair. Why the sudden question? Just curious. She looked down and took a bite of rice. I thought for a moment and said, doesn't he need to be big? 2 bedrooms are enough. 1 bedroom, 1 study. There has to be a balcony with a chair where you can sit in the sun. And a place to grow flowers, she added. That potos of yours is practically turning into a spirit. If you don't repo it soon, it'll collapse the bookshelf. I laughed. I'll save you a spot for flowers. She didn't say anything more, but she kept smiling. Subtle smile, not the kind that bursts with joy, but the kind that comes from secretly savoring something good. After dinner, I washed the dishes while she went to the balcony to take down the laundry. The faucet was running loudly, and through the noise I could hear her humming a tune from the balcony, the same one I could never name. I put the dishes in the sterilizer, dried my hands, and walked out to the balcony. She was standing on her tiptoes, trying to reach the bedsheet on the drying rack. She couldn't quite get it out her to tries. I reached over from behind and took it down for her. The sheet fell, draping over both of us. White cotton bedsheet, translucent, letting light through. We could see each other as silhouettes. Her face was very close to mine, close enough to count the curve of her eyelashes. When you and you? Yeah? Do you remember when you said you'd buy me a ring every year? I remember. Well, you haven't bought the first one yet. She raised her left hand. The same silver band was still on her ring finger. I isn't this it? This doesn't count, she said. This is a token of our commitment. The rings need to be bought separately. I looked into her eyes. The light filtered through the bed. She was soft, making her face look especially beautiful. What kind for the first one? No diamonds. She thought for a moment. I want something simple, platinum, very thin. Okay? The second one should have a little bit of small diamonds. Okay? The third one, she paused. I haven't figured out the third one yet. Take your time. No rush. She buried her face in the bedsheet, her voice muffled. You really are something, agreeing to everything without even bargaining. What is there to bargain with you about? She lifted her head, her eyes bright. The bedsheet slipped off the drying rack and fell over our heads like a little tent. In that white, translucent, she reached up and wrapped her arms around my neck. Then it has settled, she said, her voice very, very soft. 1 every year, no backing out. It has settled. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed me. That night, we lay on the balcony looking at the stars. You couldn't see many stars, but the moon was very bright, large and round, hanging above the rooftop of the building across the street. She spread a yoga mat on the floor, and we squeezed together, covered by the sheet we'd just taken down. When you and you? Yeah? Do you think there are people on the moon? No. People who've been up there said so. She laughed and nudged me with her elbow. Then tell me if technology ever gets so advanced that regular people can go to the moon. Would you go? If you go. What if you go and I can't see? Then I wouldn't go either. She was quiet for a while, then rolled over, lying on my chest, her chin resting against my collarbone, looking down at me from above. Here, she said, 1 word at a time. I'm really good with words. Everything I said is from the heart. I know. Her lips brushing against my collarbone, her voice going muffled. That is why I think I am pretty lucky. The moon moved slowly from above the opposite building to the other side of the sky. The street downstairs grew quiet. Occasionally a car passed, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling like a brief flash of white light. She fell asleep on my chest, her breathing soft and even. I stroked her hair from root to tip. Over and over, the wind slipped through the gap in the balcony screen, carrying the coolness of early autumn. I pulled the sheet higher, covering her shoulders. She shifted slightly in her sleep, her lips brushing lightly against my collarbone like a kiss from a dream. I closed my eyes. The whole world felt quiet, so quiet that only her breathing, my heartbeat, and the faint, distant chirping of insects remained. This, I thought, is the best life I could ever imagine. 我继续翻译接下来的部分。That night we lay on the balcony looking at the stars. Of course in the city, you couldn't see many stars, but the moon was very bright, large and round, hanging above the rooftop of the building across the street. And we squeezed together, covered by the sheet we'd just taken down. Plain you, aren't you? Yeah. Do you think there are people on the moon? No. How do you know? People who've been up there said so. She laughed and nudged me with her elbow. Then tell me, if technology ever gets so advanced that regular people can go to the moon, would you go? If you go, I go. What if I can't go? Then I won't go either. She was quiet for a while, then rolled over, lying on my chest, her chin resting against my collarbone, looking down at me from above. You, she said one word at a time, are really good with words. Everything I said is from the heart. I know. She lowered her head, her lips brushing against my collarbone, her voice going muffled. That's why I think I'm pretty lucky. The moon moves slowly from above the opposite building to the other side of the sky. Occasionally a car passed, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling like a brief flash of white light. She fell asleep on my chest, her breathing soft and even. I stroked her hair, from root to tip, over and over. Carrying the coolness of early autumn, I pulled the sheet higher, covering her shoulders. She shifted slightly in her sleep, her lips brushing lightly against my collarbone like a kiss from a dream. I closed my eyes. The whole world felt quiet, so quiet that only her breathing, my heartbeat, and the faint, distant chirping of insects remained. This, I thought, is the best life I could ever imagine. The next morning, I woke up before she did. The early sunlight was falling on her face, making her skin look almost translucent. Her hair was spread across my arm, which had gone completely numb. But I didn't want to move. I just lay there watching her sleep. She wrinkled her nose slightly. Then her eyelids fluttered open. She looked at me, dazed for a second, then smiled the kind of smile that happens before you're fully awake, when you're still half in a dream. Morning, she murmured. Morning. How long have you been awake? Not long. Your eyes aren't even puffy. I laughed. Okay, a while. She sat up, stretched like a cat, then looked down at me. You could have woken me up. I liked watching you sleep. She flushed, grabbed a pillow, and smacked me with it. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her back down. She landed on my chest with a soft comp, her face inches from mine. When you, aren't you? When? You're staring. I know. She buried her face in my neck, her voice tiny. Stop staring. Why? Because my face is a mess in the morning. I think you're beautiful. She went completely still. Then very softly, she bit my shoulder, not hard, just enough to leave a faint mark. What was that for? I asked. For saying things like that first thing in the morning. My heart can't take it. I laughed and held her tighter. 3 days later, I came home to find her sitting cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by open tabs on her laptop and a notebook full of messy handwriting. She was biting the end of her pen, frowning at the screen. What are you doing? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Research. On what? She looked up at me, her expression serious. Wedding rings. We're not even engaged yet, so it takes time to find the right one. She turned the laptop toward me. Okay. Platinum or white gold? I can't decide. I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. The screen showed dozens of ring-designed sleek bands, 米毫she glowing edges, brush finishes. She had bookmarked at least 20. You've been busy, I said. I told you. I take my rings seriously. She pointed at one, a simple platinum band, with a single tiny diamond set flush into the metal. For the first year. What do you think? I looked at the picture, then at her. Her eyes were bright with excitement, her cheeks slightly pink. She looked like a child on Christmas morning. I think, bet you're kind of cute when you're like this. She threw a pillow at me. Bet we can. She dragged me to a jewelry store. I had fancy one, a small, quiet shop tucked away on a side street, run by an old jeweler, looked like he'd been making rings since before we were born. The old man brought out a tray of rings and set it on the glass counter. Shen Tingwan leaned over it, her eyes scanning each one carefully. She picked up the platinum band she showed me online, turned it over in her fingers, held it up to the light. What do you think? Try it on. She slipped it onto her ring finger. It fit perfectly. The tiny diamond caught the light and threw a small spark onto the ceiling. She stared at her hand, turning it this way and that. It's pretty, she said softly, but there was something in her voice, a slight hesitation. What's wrong? She shook her head. It's pretty, but I knew her too well by then. You don't love it. She looked up at me, her lips pressed together. Then she sighed. It's not that I don't love it. Took off the ring, and saw it back on the tray. I don't know, maybe I need to think about it more. The old jeweler, who had been quietly polishing a pair of earrings behind the counter, spoke up without looking at us. He said, feels like it's always been yours, even before you put it on. Shen Tingwen looked at him, then at me. Something in her expression shifted. Thank you, she said to the old man. Then she took my hand and pulled me out of the shop. Outside, the street was quiet, lined with old trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn. She walked a few steps ahead of me, then stopped and turned around. When you want you? Yeah, I don't want to buy a ring. I raised an eyebrow. She shook her head. I don't want to buy one. I want you to make it. I stared at her. Make it? Not like forge yourself with a hammer and anvil. She laughed, but design it. Pick the stone, draw it out. Have someone make it for us. Something no one else has. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves. The apple in her face was shifting patterns of light and shadow. She looked at me with those eyes, expectant, hopeful, completely certain. Okay. Okay? Yeah. She broke into a grin, wide and bright and full of something that made my chest ache in the best possible way. She ran back to me, threw her arms around my neck, and kissed me right there on the sidewalk, under the half-turned trees. Thank you, she whispered against my lips. Don't thank me yet. I have no idea how to design a ring. You'll figure it out. How do you know? She pulled back just enough to look at me, her hands still resting on my shoulders. Because, she said, you've never let me down. That night, I stayed up late after she fell asleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper, trying to sketch something, anything that felt like her. Simple, she'd said, a mighty tiny diamond. But simple was the hardest thing to get right. I drew and erased, until the paper was smudged gray and the trash can was full of crumpled balls. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Shen Tingwan stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of my old t-shirts that hung down to her thighs, her hair messy, her eyes still heavy with sleep. It's 2 in the morning, she said. I know. Come to bed. In a minute. She walked over, pulled out the chair next to mine, and sat down. She looked at the paper and all the failed sketches, the erased lines, the tiny notes I'd scribbled in the margins. Then she looked at me. Let me see your hand. I held out my hand. She took it in both of hers, turned it over, traced the lines on my palm with her fingertip. Her touch was light, almost ticklish. You have good hands, she said quietly. They're just hands. No, she shook her head. They're your hands. They make me coffee. They hold me when I can't sleep. They cut fruit and put it in my mouth. They come home late, but they always come home. She looked up at me. Whatever you design will be perfect, because these hands made it. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, letting her hold my hand, while the refrigerator hummed softly in the corner and the night stretched quiet and endless outside the window. Come to bed, she said again. This time, it wasn't a suggestion. I put down the pencil, turned off the kitchen light, then followed her back to the bedroom. She climbed under the covers first and held them open for me, and she immediately curled into my side, her head on my shoulder, her hand finding mine under the blanket. When you want you. I'm not going anywhere. I know. Do you? I turned my head to look at her. In the darkness I could barely make out the shape of her face, but I could feel her looking at me steady, unwavering. Yeah, I said. She squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. And that was the end of that conversation. But it was also the beginning of something else, something I didn't have words for yet. Something that felt a lot like forever, but even that word didn't seem big enough.